Imran Hussein bhai. I couldn't have thought of a better guest for the topic of jinns. The jinn are mentioned throughout the Holy Quran. How come?
There was one amongst the jinn who was named Iblis. If I say the other name he's known by, you'll recognize him, Shaitan.
Would the good jinn ever try interacting with us?
I don't know for certain, but the evil jinn definitely do.
Do you think we live in a world where there are jinns who've taken the form of human beings and are public figures as well?
Yes.
I would love for you to give context on the Quran.
It's the literal words of God in the Arabic language. The Quran itself, or Islam, doesn't recognize itself as a religion in that sense. It's a deen or a way of life.
Do you think the flip side could be true as well, where your positive thoughts are also coming from higher beings?
This happens. God can direct you and guide you. You may have true dreams still exist. And it's happened to many people. I've had dreams, I'm sure you've had dreams, which, a few weeks later or a few months later, and it happens, and you're thinking, I saw this in a dream, or I was made aware of this in a dream. So true dreams can happen as well. The main issue of this sort of post-modern or meta-modern society is that they don't believe in any of this anymore. Someone said that one of the greatest achievements of Satan is him being able to convince people that he doesn't exist. Because once he gets you to believe he doesn't exist, he has full control over you. Right? But once you recognize him, you become aware of him and the way he functions, then you're in good stead, basically.
Often, if a person is supposedly possessed, in India, one of the key things to do is to take that person to a dargah.
There is these traditions of going to these peers, sometimes call them, peer babas. Unfortunately, let's be honest here, most of these guys are frauds.
Really?
Yeah.
You briefly mentioned Aleister Crowley. What is said about Aleister Crowley?
Yeah, he's probably the most famous occultist, like I said, of the 20th century. And apparently he made contact with one of these beings called Lam. When you look at that being and you look at the modern grey alien, it's almost identical.
I'm just going to be very transparent with you right now. There's something in this room and I can kind of almost feel it blocking off some of my questions.
I'm not surprised, bro. These things, they don't want
to be spoken about?
Yeah.
This conversation is an attempt to learn about two chapters of the human reality very deeply. The first chapter is the world of the jinn. It's an occult-oriented chapter of the human reality. It's a paranormal chapter of the human reality. The other chapter that we've tried to uncover over the course of the conversation is about the teachings of the Holy Quran. It's about the teachings of Islam. And both these chapters are deeply linked, but you need a Quranic scholar to teach you about both these subjects. It's been the honor of my life to meet Imran Hussein bhai. All I want to say is that yes, this conversation gets a little scary. It has that horror element, but you need to know that the divine God, Allah, is with you through the conversation. You learn a lot through the course of the next hour and a half because of the immaculate Imran Hussein. Imran Hussein bhai, welcome to the Ranveer show.
Thank you, Ranveer. Pleasure, man, honestly. I checked out some of your stuff, like I said before, doing this, as you did, I'm sure, is all we all do. And I was very impressed, I've got to say, Wanted to commend you, I guess, first and foremost, because, having such a big platform and taking such a balanced stance and an honest stance with certain topics, I think is commendable, definitely. Especially with Islam. I saw you speaking about Islam on certain podcasts. And just having the courage to call things out, very respectable. So I really commend you for that. Not condemn you, commend you, commend you for that.
Thank you, brother. Honestly, it's an attempt to understand life more deeply, and to a large degree, I think that this is what our ancestors did, but those middle generations forgot about this stuff. And this is similar to what we were speaking about right before we began rolling right now. That I think the world is waking up to religion for sure, spirituality for sure, but the occult as well. But to the possibility of subjects beyond traditional human understanding. I found your profile so fascinating, bro. You're the right person to teach me and therefore all of us about certain aspects of Islam. But at the same time, you also have a deep interest in the UFO phenomenon that we're seeing is rising on the internet lately. I couldn't have thought of a better guest for the topic of jinns, but also a bit from a modern lens. So thank you for being on the show,
No,
bro.
you're more it's my pleasure, honestly.
I'm honestly bursting with like questions right now.
Let's go ahead, man. Let's get into it. Yeah.
Okay. We had an actor called Javed Jaffrey on the show a few years ago, and he was the first person who mentioned jinns on the show. And since then, it's been one of those topics that's been in my heart in terms of something I wish to talk about on an episode. This is that episode. So I would love to know right from the basics, in terms of the Quran, what is said about jinns and what are they? Imagine someone's hearing that word for the first time.
Yeah. So etymologically, the word itself, the root of it it refers to something in the Arabic, to something that's hidden or that's not seen. So it's a part of the hidden realm, the unseen realm. Now, obviously, if you look at this, what we're discussing right now from the perspective of modernity or a secular perspective, the unseen world doesn't exist, right? It's all the seen, the physical, the material. But I think people have grown beyond this now. So these topics are very interesting to people. So from an Islamic perspective, this is referring to the unseen. It's a part of the unseen. So the jinn are beings within Islam that are creation of God. God created them. God created them before he created the human beings, us humans. And they occupied the world. So the jinn have been there. They were created before us. They were created from a different substance than us. So in the Quran, now obviously some of these things need to be interpreted. God refers to the humans as being created from a clay-like substance. The angels were created from light. Now the angels are also these, non-physical, you can say supernatural beings.
Farishte?
Farishte in Urdu, or in Hindi, that's the word that would be used. The angels of God, basically.
In Arabic, what's it called?
Angels, malaika. Malaika.
Malaika.
Yeah, malaika, wow. the Arabic word itself. So they're the angels. Now the angels don't have free will. They are completely obedient to God. They obey the commands of God. Then God also created the jinn, right? Now the jinn were created in the Quran, it refers to as from a type of smokeless fire that's used in the Arabic. Now this many have interpreted in different ways, but it's a different substance. If you look at it from a sort of modern scientific perspective, some speculated that this may be referring to plasma, for example, the fourth state of matter. I incline towards that understanding, but again, it's speculation at the end of the day. So they're created from the smokeless fire, and humans were created from a clay-like substance, from the earth, essentially. So as humans, we have the physical selves, this material body, and then there's the soul within the human being. As God says, he created our souls and instilled the souls within this physical body. But the jinns, they were created from this smokeless type of fire. They were created, they were occupied the earth, but they started to create a lot of corruption and bloodshed and drama and facade and so on. There was one amongst the jinn who was named Iblis. In the Quran, we hear of him. Now, this figure, I don't know if you've heard of him before. So Iblis, most people, if I say the other name he's known by, you'll recognize him, Shaitan.
Gotcha.
In English, Satan. Right? But his original name wasn't Shaitan. His original name was Iblis. He was a jinn. But he was a jinn that he started to worship God and became a devout, obedient worshiper of God. And by the way, the jinn, just like humans, have free will. So they were created with free will as well, like us. So he would worship God, and he rose in rank because he would worship God, and he became very obedient to God to the degree where he got to the level of the angels. So he'd worship God amongst the angels. And then God decided to create insan in the Arabic, which is the human, right? Which is us human beings. So God created Adam, or Adam as he's known, right? The first human being. Now, again, the narratives, if I'm just stringing all the different sources for
Take your
us
time,
here.
bro.
Yeah.
Enjoying just being in your presence.
Okay, so I'm going to string all the sources together, because when I refer to these things, there's different sources I'm referencing. So the Quran, the Hadith literature, the tafsir or the exegesis of the Quran, etc. But I'm bringing you all together to paint this sort of cohesive image for us that's easy to understand. So God creates Adam, his physical being, and the narratives tell us that Shaitan or Iblis at the time saw that God created this being and started to become jealous, right? He didn't like this being. He would travel through the body of Adam and realize he was hollow, internally empty, meaning the physical being of Adam. And then God at one point decided to breathe the soul that God created into the human being, right? Which brought Adam to life. Now, when he was brought to life, the Quranic narrative, when we read the second chapter of the Quran, God tells us that he taught Adam the names of all things. Now, what these things are, again, scholars have given a lot of thought to this and exegesis on this. Some say it's the name of all created things. Or some say it was knowledge that God gave Adam. which made Adam superior to all these other beings. So God taught him the names of things. And when God announced to the angels that he's creating this being, the angels, God records them as saying in the Quran, they asked God, are you going to create a being that's going to cause corruption and bloodshed on the earth? Now the scholars ask, well, why did the angels assume this? And some say it was because they saw what the jinn were doing on the earth, the corruption and the bloodshed. So they assumed that these beings, this new being also with free will is going to do the same thing, right? Because when you have free will, you can choose to do good, you can choose to do bad, right? If you go down the bad route, there's going to be bloodshed and corruption, right? And this is evident from our own history, the history of the world. So the angels asked, and God says, I know what you do not know, to the angels. So then God teaches Adam the names of things. Then he brings Adam in front of the angels and he says, tell them the names of all these things. Adam does this. He displays this ability God has given him. And then God asks the angels, including Iblis is in that gathering now, this jinn, to bow down into prostration in front of Adam. Now this prostration was out of respect, not out of worship. Because in Islam, the concept of Tawheed, or oneness of God, is very clear. That the human being was created to worship God alone. Not to bow down to anything or anyone else. Just worship God, the one that made you directly. So God tells the angels to bow down to Adam out of respect. All of the angels immediately bow down because they obey the commands of God. But Iblis doesn't. He refuses. And then God asks him, he says, well, why didn't you bow down to Adam? And he said, I am better than him. And then he reasons with God. So you can say he was the first sort of pseudo-rationalist in history who argued with God, right? And he said, no, I am better than him. I am made of fire. He is made of clay. So this was his rationalization. But God is all-knowing. And what Iblis didn't understand, that God has done, there's wisdom behind why God created this being and why he asked. But his arrogance and his jealousy prevented him from bowing down to Adam. And this now sets the sort of scene, the historical scene for this battle between good and evil that we find in history. That Iblis says, no, I'm not going to bow down to him. And then God says to him, admonishes him. But he says, God asks God to give him time till the day of judgment. So God answers this request. He says, fine, you got time till the day of judgment. And he says, I will try to mislead this being that you've created. I will try to affect him and take him off the straight path, right? So this animosity and this hatred, this dynamic, the scene is set now. So Shaitan, he became Shaitan at this point. Because Shaitan is the evil one, the accursed one. That's what the word means in Arabic. The one that's cursed by God. So his objective was set. His objective now to the day of judgment was to misguide human beings and affect human beings. This is the sort of foundation of the story, right? The dynamic between man and jinn, right? Now, if you look at the Quran, the jinn are mentioned constantly throughout the Quran.
Really?
Yeah, throughout the Quran. So in the second chapter of the Quran, most of the story that I've mentioned to you is there. Then you have Surah Jinn, which is a specific chapter of the Quran named after the jinn. It's called, the surah or the chapter. Chapter isn't the right word for surah. Surah is a part of the Quran, but you can say chapter in English. That's called the jinn.
But okay, so bro, I understood the origin stories of Shaitan.
Mm-hmm.
Am I supposed to look at Shaitan as the leader of the jinn?
You can say that, yes.
Okay.
Right. So he was maybe not the first, but you can say he's the leader of the jinn, the evil jinn, especially, because Shaitan is the evil amongst the jinn. Now, amongst the jinn, there are good jinn and there are evil jinn. Just like amongst humans, there are good humans and there are evil humans. So that's why in the Quran, it's what's interesting, the word shaitan is used for humans and for the jinn sometimes. Right? So it's not exclusive for the jinn.
Gotcha.
And many people have this misconception, but in the Quran, God refers to some humans as shayateen and some jinn as shayateen as well.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I've read about the topic of Shaitan, I've read about the topic of Satan. And please correct me or disagree with me because I think it leads to richer conversation. What I've understood is that now if you're living your own human life, you're going about life making your own decisions, but your own mind creates bad possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I'm feeling anger towards this situation or person. I'm feeling greed. I'm feeling lust. That pull in the negative direction towards these emotions is created by Satan or Shaitan, which is also present inside us.
Mm-hmm.
Fair to say?
I think you're spot on, yeah.
Right?
So there's a dynamic that's going on there, which is that the human mind, yes, we have many thoughts throughout the day. Some are good, some are bad. But what Shaitan does is something called waswasa in Arabic. The term is waswasa, which is basically whispering. He whispers to you, like you mentioned. So he may incline you towards those negative aspects of your personality and your psychology and get you to focus on those things and encourage you to engage in those thoughts more and even act out on those things. But we learn from Islam that there is a system the evil jinn follow, which is they work in gradual steps. So they will gradually encourage you. First, they may get you to think about certain things. And the more you think about these things, the more they build in your mind and the more you focus on them. And sometimes this is the way he affects human beings, right? So if you look at, for example, some psychological issues some people may have, the metaphysical dimension of it from a religious perspective, maybe, that shaitan is encouraging the person to fixate on certain negative things, which then troubles the person and then causes these issues, physiologically within the person, such as adrenaline and which cause anxiety and all of this type of stuff, right? So there's definitely that metaphysical dimension that's taking place. But waswasa is there. So he will whisper to you negative thoughts and agitate you and bother you and get you to focus on negative things and do bad things, etc.
Got it. I've had countless spiritualists on the show who've constantly mentioned the possibility that human beings are arrogant enough to think that all of their thoughts are their own. But your thoughts are affected by some external forces which you're not in control of. And a very practical version of this possibility is when you enter certain geographies or certain spaces, sometimes you just feel like what we call a bad vibe. But it could be that there are external things which you cannot see, which are affecting the way you're thinking.
100%, yeah. In Islam, we also recognize that there is, you can say, the spiritual sense. So when we pray salah, which is the prayer, the 5 daily prayers, it's a connection with God. You're engaging with God because you're reciting the Quran in your prayers. So God is speaking to you. And then you are making prayer in the salah itself, which is you speaking to God. So it's a dynamic between you and God, a relationship between you and God. That's why salah, the English word prayer isn't the correct translation, because prayer is supplication. But salah is a connection with God. So that's not happening, through physical means. There's a spiritual connection. So yes, you get a vibe sometimes. You go somewhere and you feel something is off.
It's like you're tuning your radio set to tune into that.
There's like a spiritual sense. So there's the 5 senses, and then you've got the 6th sense, which is the spiritual sense, which is the spiritual heart or the soul, which, connects.
Now, you said that you can understand shaitan to be the leader of the bad jinns. And we also spoke a little bit about finding bad vibes in certain places. Could be a possibility that those certain places are occupied by bad jinns that we cannot see.
Yes.
Do you know A.R. Rahman is? The music?
I've heard the name.
Okay, he's a legendary music composer from India. I had a conversation about Sufism with him a long time ago. And he said that there's 36,000 filters between yourself and the ultimate reality. And as you keep spiritually progressing, a few of those filters are lifted up. And every single occultist that I've had on the show says something similar. As you keep building your intuition, you are able to see things that you weren't able to see earlier. On a very basic level, it begins by just being a better observer, picking up a vibe from a human being, becoming more intuitive about situations. Of course, on higher levels of that same journey, you are able to see things around you. That's how I understand the concept of jinns as well. They are, for lack of better words, higher or lower beings. I'd probably put the bad jinns as lower beings and the good jinns as higher beings. We spoke about Farishte some time ago, Malaika.
Yes.
I'd put them as higher beings as well. And for me, this is one of the most fascinating aspects of Islam. Like from the outside, because I'm still learning about it through the show. But this is the one that caught my, maybe out of natural interest for the occult. But please correct me, add to what I've said.
Many people have, like, I have friends, for example, I have a friend who's a white revert to Islam. And the reason he looked into Islam was because of his experience with jinn. So because he used to go to Africa, travel a lot, and he had some experiences with black magic there and voodoo and stuff like this. And then when he came across the concept of jinn and he read the Quran, he's like, well, I've seen this stuff. I know this stuff, and that brought him to Islam. That was his journey. And many people are interested in this topic, And like I said, the Quran, God himself speaks about the jinn throughout the Quran. If it wasn't important, God wouldn't speak about them, right? And one of the reasons is because, like we saw in the story, shaitan is now your number one enemy, to take you off the straight path. So life, according to, and just to, so again, this is another element which will build out the picture. What is the life in this world about? Existentially from an Islamic perspective? God tells us that he created life and death to test which of us is best in deed, in action, right? So this is a testing ground, this life. It's not supposed to be paradise. We're here to be tested. Are we going to use all the faculties God has given us, our hearts, our minds, to do what's right and stand up for the truth and do good things? Or are we going to do what's evil and bad? That's the test, right? And one of the fundamental aspects of the test is, can the human being, with all the faculties God has given him, recognize his creator, right? Because that's fundamental. God also says in the Quran that he created the human beings and the jinn kind. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, the Arabic ayah in the Quran, the verse. I did not create the jinn kind or the human beings except to know me and to worship me, right? And worship in Islam is not just praying to God. It's literally your whole living conscious existence. How you act, what you do. Are you a good person? That is all worship, if you do it with the right consciousness and the right mindset. So the jinn are constantly mentioned. And also God mentions that they are also your enemy, the bad jinn, the evil jinn. They are your enemy because they will constantly try to misguide you. That's what Shaitan said. He will try to misguide human beings from the straight path. So God warns us about them and gives us a lot more information about them. I mean, we know there's so much mentioned about these beings we call the jinn. And what's also interesting, by the way, and I'm sure you've looked into this, is that if you look at world religions, and I studied this quite a bit for my the first few years of my master's, is that you see that any culture, any place, any time throughout history, whether you look at the Irish law, whether you look at native Indian law, whether you look at African religions, every culture and religion has mentioned beings that are not God and are not human, but they're somewhere in between. They occupy a realm in between. And when you study those beings, one thing you see is that there's clear correlations between them. The sources are talking about the same entity, right? But that manifests in different ways. And what's also very interesting about jinn is what they're capable of doing. And I think this explains a lot of things in the world. So for example, the jinn have an ability, which is that they can take on different forms, right? The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, mentioned in one narration that the jinn are of three kinds. Now, they're not limited to these three kinds, but these are three main kinds. Those that fly through the sky, those that appear in the form of dogs and snakes, and those that come and go, right? And that's very interesting. We also know, and again, we can get into this when maybe later on, that there are certain examples or narrations in the Islamic tradition which highlight that the jinn can take on the form of human beings. The jinn can take on the form of different animals and different beings. And it's when they take on these forms is when we can see them. But in their natural forms, we normally cannot see them, right? And this is very interesting because this, if you understand conceptually what the jinn are capable of, like they can take on different forms and manifest in different ways, this actually explains a lot of the paranormal, and this even explains a lot of the sort of modern day UFO phenomenon as well that we're currently witnessing that's becoming a trend. Joe Rogan and all these big guys podcasters are speaking about it these days. So, I mean, it's very interesting, this topic. I mean, it goes in so many different directions and it's also linked to the occult. If you study occult history, maybe we can get into this as well. You'll see that the link with the jinn, they may not call them the jinn, some do, some have different names for them, but there's always a link there with the jinn.
Okay, one statement and one question.
Sure.
The statement is that I'm loving speaking with you, man. I'm loving listening to you.
I'm enjoying this too, man. It's very relaxed and, I can see how much you're into the topic, which gets me excited because I love talking about this too.
The question, what did you study for your master's?
So Islamic studies.
Okay, wow.
But it was, the route I took was, it was more sort of generalized Islamic studies along with other religions and Islamic philosophy and things like this.
Nice, bro.
Yeah. And then my personal work experience as well. I actually gained much of my knowledge through my work experience because my work allowed me to read and study a lot in an autodidactic sense by myself as opposed to academically. The academia I went into later on again, back to academia.
Give us some context on your work.
So I work for an organization called Sapiens Institute. Our objective is to share Islam intellectually, removing the misconceptions and there's a lot of nonsense out there. Not only Islam, with other religions as well these days. When politics and religion and other objectives get mixed in, religion takes the brunt of it most of the time, unfortunately. But our objective is share Islam intellectually with people, remove the misconceptions so they can understand what Islam actually is and what it actually teaches, as opposed to these misconceptions and people being misinformed by these things that are out there.
Been waiting for you for a very long time.
I mean, if you look at it from a religious perspective, God decrees these things. I mean, I didn't plan this, you didn't plan. It just, in a way, happened, a mutual contact that we had, we knew, and it just, sprung from that. So it's interesting how things work in this world. Who writes the script, man? It's very interesting.
For my podcast, I mean, there's always been a bit of a spiritual bent. We hadn't scheduled this. This is the first time we're ever meeting each other. I saw you for the first time a couple of days ago, thanks to Afghani Bhai sitting right here.
I love that name, Afghani Bhai. We're going to use that from now on. Yeah. I'm not going to say his other name that we refer to him, just in case he doesn't want people to know, but Afghani Bhai is good.
But, before I took off for the UK, I prayed and I just said that, hey, send me the right people for these this is what I want to explore. I want to take this content out for the world. I know that this particular episode is going to get a lot of views, but that's a bonus. The real benefit is just meeting you for the first time.
Oh, likewise, man.
Honestly, the time I feel the most alive is when I'm talking about topics like this. Because yes, it has some dark elements, but I feel that when the human mind understands darkness, you also move closer to the light.
Yeah. And that's what makes us superior. It's the intellect that God's blessed us with, right? In the Islamic understanding, one of the things that distinguishes the human from the jinn is this intellectual capacity that we have. Physically, we may not be as powerful as the jinn, because again, there's so much to talk about, about what the strength of the jinn or the power of the jinn, the abilities of the jinn. We can't do many of those things as human beings. But one of the things that sets us apart and elevates us is our intellectual ability. So although we may talk about these dark topics, as long as you have knowledge and clarity, you can safeguard yourself. You're good. You're in a good place. But yeah, I mean.
So you think this ability to go about analytical thought is what separates humankind from the jinn?
One of the things. It's not to say jinns can't think. We saw from the story of Iblis, right? Logically, if we think about this, he reasoned with God. His reasoning was flawed, but nevertheless, he did reason with God. So they do have the ability to reason, but maybe not to the degree that the human beings can attain or get to the truth through thought and reflection and what we may call philosophy today, or just deep introspection.
Okay. You said that the jinn are mentioned throughout the Holy Quran. How come?
So yeah, one of the things I think, in Islam, the Quran we believe is revelation from Allah, from God, right?
Yeah, let's take a step back.
Yeah.
I don't know how you're going to do this, but I would love for you to give context on the Quran, because most people know what the Quran is. I'm talking about non-Muslims.
Yeah.
But don't know the contents of it. So is it a story?
The Quran we believe is revelation from God, and it's the words of God. So which were communicated through the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, over 1400 years ago in the Arabian desert, in Mecca, right? And then he moved to Medina later on, or Yathrib as it was known, and then it became known as Medina when he moved there. So the Quran is revelation from God. It's the literal words of God in the Arabic language, right? That was then communicated through the Prophet to humanity, to people. What is the Quran? If you study the Quran from cover to cover, it doesn't follow you what some would call Aristotelian logic. What I mean by that is, in the West, we have texts which are beginning, middle, and end, right? So that's how a normal textbook read. If you read a storybook, it has a beginning, middle, and end. If you even read a scientific textbook, it has some sort of structure, beginning, middle, and end. The Arabic structure, or Semitic languages generally, they have a different structure. Right? So it's not beginning, middle, and end. So when you read the Quran, you will see the Quran will speak about one topic, and then it will jump to a different topic, and then it'll come back to the same topic. And then it'll give you a different shade of the third topic or the second topic that was mentioned in a different way. So it'll go from one topic to a different, and sometimes it will be first-person narrative where God is speaking to you directly, and then God will go into a story, which then reflects some of the lessons that God has just mentioned through that story, right? So the Quran is structured in a very different way. That's why when people read the Quran in English, when they're used to reading normal books, right, it's very hard for them to engage in the beginning, because it follows a totally different structure of reading or understanding. So yeah, there's stories in the Quran. There are things that God says. So laws in the Quran are mentioned. There are certain principles that are mentioned. There's a lot of different things in the Quran. But if you were to take a holistic understanding of what the Quran is, or what the Quran says it is, the Quran says, what God says in the Quran, that the Quran is guidance. Hudan linnas, guidance for humanity, and hudanil muttaqeen, another word that's used, guidance for people of taqwa, people of consciousness of God or awareness of God. So it's a book of guidance, basically, right? It's what we believe the Quran is the final revelation. It's not a new religion. Now, again, from a secular political perspective, what you see is that Islam, as with other religions, is presented as just a religion, right? So that it's something you practice in your own behind closed doors and stuff like this. But the Quran itself, or Islam, doesn't recognize itself as a religion in that sense. It's a deen or a way of life, right? And what's also beautiful about Islam, for me at least, is that God outlines that this is not for a specific group of people in a specific age. This is for the whole of humanity. Everyone could benefit from it if they want to. And it's not a new religion. It's from the same God that sent messengers and prophets throughout history, right? So God sent different messengers. The Quran mentions many, many messengers God sent, some by name, some not by name. But messengers were sent to different nations, different people throughout history with the same fundamental message. So the core message was always the same. Recognize your creator, worship him, live a good life, because you're going to be accountable on the day of judgment. You're going to face your creator after death, right? So the core message was the same, but the laws and rules were different according to different times and places. So you'll see those change over time, but the fundamental message has always been very simple and the same. Worship your creator, live a good life, you're going to return back to God, you're going to be accountable. So that's what the Quran is in a nutshell. It's guidance for humanity.
It's a guidance for humanity, but is it also guidance for jinns?
Yes. It's interesting you asked that question. So, there was times in the Prophet Muhammad's life, peace be upon him, where the jinn actually listened to the Quran. So there was one occasion where he went to a place called Taif in Arabia. I believe it's just outside Medina, right? And he went, and because the Prophet's role is what? The Prophet's role, it's like the hero's journey. So the prophetic figure has revelation that comes to him, right? He receives revelation from God. There's a period where he's trying to figure things out, and he's developing and learning and receiving this information. And then he's given the mission of carrying this to humanity, right? So the Prophet's job, all the Prophet's job was to deliver this message to the people. So the Prophet Muhammad on one occasion went to a place called Taif, an area in Arabia, to deliver this message. But the chiefs of that area, they mocked him, they beat him, you told the kids to throw stones at him and get rid of him, basically. And I mean, there's narrations that tell us that the Prophet bled to the point where the blood seeped down to his sandals and the sandals stuck to his feet, right? The blood between his feet and the sandals. And on the way back, he was reciting the Quran. And some of the jinn listened to the Quran, right? And we know that the Quran mentions this, that the jinn listened to the Quran and then some of them accepted this message, right? And they took it back to their communities and their people, right? So we know that the Quran is for the jinn too. Right, like I said in the verse where God says, and He created the jinn kind and mankind for no other reason except to worship God. So the objective is the same for the jinn and human beings, which is to know God and to worship Him. But again, amongst humans and the jinn, there'll be those that don't and those that do. So the Quran and other revelations, I believe previous revelations, were also for both humans and the jinn kind.
Understood. Okay, I'm going to ask you to help me with some visualization here. Because when an average person hears the word jinn, if they know a little bit about it, they'd automatically tie it to one of ghost or demon.
Yeah.
One of these two things.
Yes.
What am I supposed to visualize when I'm thinking about a jinn?
Yeah, so it's actually a brilliant question you've asked. Because sometimes some Muslims struggle with this too, this thing. Because when you think about the word jinn, right? And this is not only for the subcontinent. This is the same anywhere in the West as well. When you think about jinn, you think of demons, or you think of ghosts, or you think of an evil being that possesses. Sure, jinn possess people, right? The possession phenomenon, again, is cross-cultural. You'll see in different cultures, different communities, etc. But the jinn are not limited to these things. Again, if you look at Hollywood, they've caricatured the jinn. You think of jinn, you think of these blue genies that come out of a lamp. Right?
Because of Aladdin.
Aladdin, exactly. Right? So it's these visuals that come to your mind. But the jinn are far more than this. Right? So there are these beings. For example, when in the Quran, God speaks about the story of Solomon, King Solomon, Sulaiman alayhi salam. He was given a certain kingdom. So Solomon made a prayer to God. He asked God to give him a kingdom like no one else has had before and no one else would have. And God gave him command over the jinn, the winds, the animals and so on. So and the jinn helped him build many things. In the Quran, God refers to the jinn as builders and divers.
And what?
Divers. People that dive into the oceans.
Okay.
Right? So these are traits we're learning about the jinn. The jinn build things. Right? We know they built things for Solomon. Right? The jinn can build things. The jinn can dive into the oceans. The jinn can also... Now, okay, let me just give you the story first. So when we read the story of Solomon in the Quran, there's a place, I think it's in chapter called Surah Naml, where the Queen of Sheba had a throne, right? And as Solomon was also a prophet of God. So again, prophet's objective is to guide human beings. So he wanted to show the power of God to the Queen of Sheba. So they were coming over to see King Solomon. And he asked his jinn, right? Or he asked the beings he had power over, the animals, the jinn, etc. Who could bring me her throne? Because she had this amazing throne. Because he wanted to show her the power. So when she came here, she saw her throne. She'd be like, how in the world did this get here? So one of the jinn, who was known as Ifrit, so there are different classes of jinn, he said, I could bring this to you, before you stand up, basically, right? Now, if you think about this is like thousands of miles away, and another one, who had knowledge of the book, some say it was a jinn, some say it wasn't, it was just another being, but the jinn have this ability, you can say in modern language, to teleport things or materialize and dematerialize things. Some would say the dimensional beings, right? So they exist in a different plane of reality and they come in and out of our plane. Because the Quran does say they see you from where you do not see them. There is a verse in the Quran. So maybe this is a different dimension, talking in today's language.
Astral plane.
Possibly, yeah. A different, dimension of a different frequency. So these are all possibilities. If you look at Arab history, just general Arab law of the Arabs, you see that it's littered with stories of jinn, right? So the Arabs, even before Islam, when they were going to the desert, they would seek refuge with the leaders of the jinn in the desert. So they weren't troubled by other jinn. Many of the Arabs would worship these jinn because they would see them as these deities, right? Some of these jinn, they would take on forms of superior beings. They would appear to people and then people worship those beings. Again, Shaitan's objective of taking people away from the worship of God, and getting them to focus on other things and other beings. So you see, they can do all of these things. They can give us waswasa, like we mentioned earlier. They can whisper to you, and that seems to be the main way that the shayateen, the jinn, the evil jinn, affect human beings, is through these whispers. And normally they're done in your own voice in your head. So you feel like it's coming from you, your thoughts. But sometimes it's disguised in your own voice, but it's coming from shayateen. One of the ways to recognize this is it a negative thought? Is it something that bothers you and irritates you and agitates you and creates anxiety within you? And then we're told there's, in the Quran that if you get something like this, you seek refuge with God, right? Because, we say the battle between good and evil, but God is the all-powerful being. The shayateen, they have no power over God. There's no comparison in any way, shape or form. So you seek refuge with God and that's it. That's a way of protecting yourself.
Do you think the flip side could be true as well, where your positive thoughts are also coming from higher beings?
They could be a case of maybe inspiration, right? It's not wahi in Arabic, which is a revelation. So we believe the revelation stopped with the Prophet, peace be upon him. He was the final messenger in the line of prophets, right? Maybe because we're near the end of history, right? So there's going to be a time where the chain of prophethood stops at some point, right? It happened to stop with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. But you still could get inspiration, and this happens, God can direct you and guide you and give you this sort of intuitive inspiration sometimes about something. You may have dreams. True dreams still exist. And it's happened to many people. I've had dreams. I'm sure you've had dreams, which, a few weeks later or a few months later, and it happens, and you're thinking, I saw this in a dream. Or I was made aware of this in a dream. So true dreams can happen as well. Yeah. So inspiration can come in different ways. So there are these forces, positive and negative, acting upon the human plane. And I think the main issue of this sort of postmodern or meta-modern society is that they don't believe in any of this anymore.
Mm.
So, someone said that one of the greatest achievements of Satan is him being able to convince people that he doesn't exist. That's his biggest achievement. Because once he gets you to believe he doesn't exist, he has full control over you, right? But once you recognize him, you become aware of him and the way he functions, then you're in good stead, basically.
Is there any reference or description of a jinn's face
So there are some references in regards to their appearance in the original form. So, for example, there's narrations that may refer to the fact that the jinn or the shayateen have horns, right? So, these depictions of horned beings, these evil demonic beings, they're not too far off in some ways, but they're vile, sort of, at least the evil amongst them in the original form. They're very sort of not pleasant to look at. But again, as human beings, we can't see them in the original form in most cases. They may take on a disturbing form sometimes, right? A very evil, scary form. But then again, that may just be a form they've taken on, not the original form, right? From an Islamic perspective, as far as I'm aware, there is no clear description of what the shayateen look like in its original form, but we have some references, about its horns, etc. But they can take on very despicable, nasty forms as well to scare people and to terrorize people as well.
Because lower beings feed on fear.
Yeah, fear is a big thing, man. Yeah, fear is, I would say, one of the shaitan's number one tools. Because once he has you afraid, because look, fear, what does it do? It paralyzes you. It sucks your energy.
I love this aspect of global, for lack of better words, religion, where every single world culture has some kind of an occult element. It's similar to what you said.
Yes.
Every single world culture talks about higher beings or otherworldly beings, other dimensions. And then there's an element about how you as a human being can either interact with those dimensions or reach out to them or reach them completely. I don't know what the global equivalent of this word is, but I've had friends who have, you know what a dargah is?
Is it a place where people go and pray?
It's a shrine.
Shrines, yes.
It's actually a very subcontinental thing.
Yes, yeah.
I don't think it exists in the Gulf as much.
Not as much, no.
Yeah. But often if a person is supposedly possessed, in India, one of the key things to do is to take that person to a dargah.
Yes.
Now, at the dargah, they end up working with, I don't know the right word, but priests of some sort.
Or leaders in the place, yeah. Religious leaders. Or,
Fakir?
Yeah, supposed religious leaders, that would they refer to them as. People that are in charge of the place, I guess, and have some abilities apparently that can exercise.
I want to talk about those leaders, how they get those abilities.
Yeah.
And this aspect of them having, for lack of better words, pet jinns themselves who help them out with their work.
Yeah.
And parallelly, I also want to talk about oracles from like ancient Greece and Rome who were able to talk about like the future.
Yes.
I wouldn't be surprised if they also had higher beings with them.
Yeah, I can see you've made the links. Yeah, and I think you're spot on. 100%.
Let's talk about this spiritual leader thing. Because I know that, pardon me for using these words, bro, but we had someone called Peter Gray on the show a few days ago. He spoke about magic, which in the subcontinent is called jadoo.
Jadoo, yes.
I don't know if it's the same word in Arabic.
I don't know. My Arabic isn't that good, so I don't know what magician was called. It's called seher, is what people do upon someone.
But there is this occult element of Islam as well.
Well, yeah, so let's, a couple of things, because we need to unpack this, right?
Take your time.
Yeah, because I want to do justice to this, because I think there's a lot to say here.
But you got what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Go for it.
So, so from an Islamic perspective, it's always not encouraged to engage with these beings, right? And the good jinn would not interact with human beings anyway. Because the good jinn, meaning those that worship God and live good lives, they have their own communities, they do their own things. There's no reason to interact, right? It's only the evil amongst the jinn that would engage in the human realm. Now, normally they won't engage for no reason. There's always a reason behind it. Sometimes it happens through a medium or a magician, right? Someone that engages in the magic, right? And we're going to get to that. Sometimes it may not happen because of that reason. Sometimes the jinn could just fall in love or become attracted to a human being, the evil jinn, and then they become attached to that person, right? Sometimes the human being may harm a jinn unintentionally. So, for example, where they may live or the places they may occupy, someone may go there and do something vile or urinate or maybe harm them in some way or the other, and that could cause a retaliation from the jinn. Right, so these are a few ways that these dimensions of these realms, our realm and their realm, may interact. Right, But a lot of the time, it's through a magician or a medium or someone that's engaging with these beings. Sometimes it's a part of your faith. You're being tested. Are you going to be patient and rely upon God? If you're, for example, dealing with a possession. We know that in Islam, the Quran itself is shifa, which is healing. So you'll see some Raqis or people that do ruqya in Arabic, which is basically, it's like the Islamic version of exorcism, which is that they recite Quran upon someone that's possessed and it removes jinn over time. Because the Quran, to harmful jinn, evil jinn, it burns them, it destroys them. So it's a means of exercising. But even in Islam, it's encouraged to not seek out ruqya as a higher level of spirituality. Again, that direct connection with God, seeking from God alone, not from anything or anyone else. It's that direct connection with your creator. So just generally, the first point I'm trying to get across is that Islamically, it's not encouraged to go to these people, and there's no need for it if you know who God is and you have a strong relationship with God. However, practically, pragmatically in society, especially in the subcontinent, there is these traditions of going to these peers, sometimes call them, peer babas. And unfortunately, let's be honest here, most of these guys are frauds. Some do engage with the jinn. So they go do certain practices. And by the way, bro, I'm sure you've looked into this. For someone to get control of the jinn or to have him as a pet, like you said.
Animism.
Yeah. It takes a lot of sacrifice and degradation of the human self to achieve that. Because the jinn don't work for free. What most people don't realize is these evil jinn, they're not going to help you for no reason, right? They want something back in return. And what they want is always more than you ask from them. And in many cases, these jinn require and ask people to do some despicable things, bro. I mean, I'll give you an example just as a side point. Have you heard of Jack Parsons?
Name rings a bell. Yeah.
Okay, so Jack Parsons was a direct student of Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley, I'm sure you've heard. You go to you talk about the occult, Aleister Crowley's there. He was one of the biggest occultists of the past, 20th century, you can say. Did some evil, despicable things. I mean, if you look at the stuff he did, it's just shocking, right? Jack Parsons was one of his main students. Now, Jack Parsons is also known, if you search him up on Google, he is one of the founding fathers of modern day rocketry. So NASA, all of these big organizations, space organizations that build shuttles and stuff. So what you see is that these people, when they engage with these beings or try to control them or get benefit from them, they have to do some disgusting things. Things which go against pure spirituality, and purity and goodness. Just evil, despicable things. You see this amongst many of the thinkers of the West as well. Those guys that were pushing on the public end, they were pushing, modernity and rationalism and empiricism and, progress and, in materialism. But on the back end, they were into alchemy and they were into all of this type of, engaging with these beings. The Greeks even, bro, they called them daemons, right? And you see they were trying to make contact with these beings, these astral beings or beings from a different plane. And a lot of these guys, so aside from the frauds that are out there amongst people, these peers, right? Though there are some that engage with these beings and they may say, oh, look, this, because, there's two in the subcontinent, there's this distinction between black and white magic, Kala Jadoo and, white magic. I don't know what they may call it in Urdu or Hindi. But it's essentially, anyone that says that they have a good being that's going to help them overcome this, it should raise a question mark. Right? Because to get control of this supposed good being, one good jinn won't come into contact with humans anyway because they're good and they know their limits and they stay to their own realm. So, and also the jinn in Islam, we know they're deceptive. They lie, they deceive, right? Again, another tangent, so much to talk about this topic, but another tangent, we know that before the advent of Islam, the jinn, one of the things they would do, because the abilities they had was they would travel into the heavens. And they would take bits of information. Because remember, we're in serial time, right? So we're past, present, future. We can't jump from now to the future, right? Or, so we're going through this linear serial time. The jinn would go out of this realm or dimension in modern terms, and they would try access knowledge from the other realms, from the realms of the angels, the heavens. And they would bring some of this knowledge of the future back and give it to these people, who would then go to the disciples and say, look, this is going to happen and this is going to happen, the oracles and stuff, right? But with the advent of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, they were banned from doing this. They couldn't go into the heavens anymore and extract information. So they had this other ability as well back in the day. So hence they would inform these oracles, and then the oracles would inform people of, even there were certain Sufis. So for example, in the time of Ibn Taymiyyah, an Islamic scholar, he has a very interesting called the Essays on the Jinn. Phenomenal book. It's an English translation as well. Some of the stories in there are mind-blowing, right? He mentions that there were Sufis at the time, certain Sufi masters, who would be in contact with these jinn. And to get in contact with them, they were probably doing some crazy stuff anyway, which was un-Islamic, right? Or unethical or unspiritual. And these beings would help them. So, if their disciples were in trouble somewhere, these jinns would take on the form of the Sufi master and appear to the disciples in another place. One of these apparently Sufi masters said that when I die, I would come and bury myself. Essentially, it was the jinn that took on the form of him and then buried him to show these miracles to the disciples and mislead them. So there's been many people like this within the Islamic tradition as well, in Islamic history, who have wanted to engage with these beings and take control of them. But it's always a very dark thing, man. I mean, anyone that says to me, look, I'm in contact with these beings and it's all good and it's pure, is always a question mark. It's just because of the nature of these beings and the fact that the good amongst them won't be engaging with us anyway. So whatever you're in contact with, how do you know it's not deceiving you and telling you it's good, right? It's a possibility. There's a deceptive nature that these beings have. So you never know with these. And that's why it's always encouraged to stay away from this realm. Hopefully that answers your question. I know I've gone on to many tangents, man.
Bro. You answered every aspect of it.
Okay, perfect.
You briefly mentioned Aleister Crowley.
Yeah.
What is said about Aleister Crowley?
He was an occultist. Yeah, he's probably the most famous occultist, like I said, of the 20th century. And one of his main objectives was to make contact with one of these beings from these other planes. He was very wealthy and rich, right? His father was Christian. He despised Christianity, right? And he was engaged in all of these occult practices and rituals. And apparently he made contact with one of these beings called Lam. Lam, yeah. If you search Lam, you'll see this depiction of a being that he painted, right? And it's very interesting. You look at that being and you look at the modern grey alien in modern UFO lore, it's almost identical, man. I mean, they look the same, right? But yeah, so he was trying to make contact with these beings and again, engaging with all these sex rituals and all of this dark stuff. And apparently he made a lot of progress in his occult practices, but he had to do a lot of disgusting stuff. And he encouraged a lot of other people to get involved in this, like Jack Parsons, etc.
Why do you think the jinns want someone to go about disgusting acts in return for whatever they're doing for the human being?
I think so, considering the history, which we discussed in the beginning, that Shaitan wants to misguide human beings, right? So if in any way, if you can take the human being away from God and purity towards evil and worshipping other things, he's happy, right? He's met his objective, right? Because he's destined for the hellfire, right? Because he disobeyed. He argued with God. He refused to bow down to Adam. He said he's going to mislead human beings. He's the evil character. Now, his objective is to take people to hell with him. Like humans, this being that God is so proud of, that God created, he wants to almost prove a point that I am better than him, as he said. And he wants to take them to hell with him.
First of all, I'm just going to be very transparent with you right now. Okay, and I also feel really safe with you guys.
You're safe, man.
Yeah.
Afghani Bhai is not going to harm any of us, man.
But there's something in this room. And I can kind of almost feel it blocking off some of my questions.
Mm-hmm.
So, but anyway, I'm just going to carry on.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm not surprised, bro. These things, they don't want
to be spoken about.
Yeah.
My head is hurting like crazy. Yeah. And I know when that happens, it happens in these kind of episodes.
You believe in God, right? I assume.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Seek refuge with God, that's it.
Yeah.
Because these beings have no power over God, man. They're a creation of God.
Yeah.
So like I said, this whole good versus evil that you see in some cultures, that the evil is as powerful as the good. It's not true. If God is the creator, whatever background you come from, if you believe God is the creator, he is the all-powerful creator that created everything and has control over everything. These beings are within the creation of God. They're not superior to God. So God, seeking refuge with God, these beings can't do anything.
Right before we began rolling, we were talking about how when you engage with these topics, you invite these topics into your reality.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Why do they not want to be spoken about?
Because this is, it's for shaitan, one of his biggest assets or the things that works for him is that when people don't know about him and the way he functions and the way he works, that's where he can function the best, in disguise, behind the curtains, so they don't like this.
What is Ayatul Kursi?
Ayatul Kursi is a verse of the Quran which is a protecting verse. So we're told to recite it, right? Because it protects you against evil forces. So Muslims are encouraged to recite it, for example, before they go to sleep at night, because it protects you from the evil beings that may come to you at night in your dreams, etc. Because one of the ways they try to affect you is through when you're in dream realm. Because the mind, something happens during sleep. Again, sleep is one of those puzzles of modern science as well, how it really works. But there's a metaphysical dimension to it. We go somewhere else, our mind, our consciousness, our souls, into a different realm. And these beings tend to affect people in sleep a lot as well. So Ayatul Kursi is a protection. The interesting story about Ayatul Kursi, in Islam, who informed us about the Ayatul Kursi being a protection against shaitan? It was the shaitan himself. One thing that he spoke the truth about. So the story basically goes, during the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, one of the companions, he was put in charge of the charity, right? The Bayt al-Mal, the place of charity, because people give charity, it would be in a place, so if anyone needed, they can come and take from the charity. So I think it was the charity he was guarding something precious. I think it was the charity. And one night this man comes and he steals from the charity. And the companion of the Prophet catches him and says, "What, you're stealing, I'm going to take you to the Prophet." He says, "No, let me go." He makes up an excuse, "My family's poor," etc. Next night he comes back, does the same thing. And I think he does this consecutively 2 or 3 nights in a row. And on the 3rd or 4th occasion, this companion of the Prophet catches him. He says, "I'm taking you to the Prophet this time. I mean, enough is enough. You keep stealing," right? He says, no, let me go. I'll tell you something of benefit. Just let me go, right? And he says, if you recite Ayatul Kursi, it will protect you against the shaitan, right? So he lets him go. Next morning, the companion goes to the Prophet and he says, this man kept doing this and he told me this. And the Prophet informs him that the man that came to you was the shaitan. He was an evil jinn in the form of a man. And what he said in this instance was true. That the Ayatul Kursi does protect you against shaitan. So that's some of the history behind Ayatul Kursi itself. But it's a protecting verse.
You spoke about how this evil jinn took the form of a man.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think we live in a world where there are jinns who've taken the form of human beings?
Yes.
And are public figures as well?
Public figures? I don't know if you have someone specific in mind, but...
I mean, I'm thinking of a few people.
Okay. They for definite, they probably, if they're evil, quote unquote, they may be the shayateen amongst the evil amongst the human. But I don't know if public figures, but from at least the Islamic side of stuff, yes, the jinn can take on the form of men. So there are narrations, one of the narrations I've just shared with you, that they can take on the form of people as well as animals and so on. Now, if a jinn appears in the form of a man, you're going to assume he's human, right? There may be some telltale signs, etc. Now, again, the how of it, we don't have much details of. How does this being that's made of smokeless fire or shapeshift or take on the form of a physical being? When he takes on this physical shape or form, is he now susceptible to the things that physical beings are susceptible to? These are big questions, right? So, for example, there is a narration where a jinn that appeared in the form of a snake, one of the companions killed the snake, but the snake also killed the companion. But the point was that he died in the form of when he was in the form of that physical snake, right? So this narration tells us that it's a possibility that when the jinn are in physical form, whatever form that is, that they're susceptible to things that other physical beings are susceptible to, like human beings, such as death, right? So again, this is all speculation, right?
But why would they take the form of something physical?
Again, to mislead, like for example,
human affairs.
Yeah, affect human affairs. So there's a very interesting book by Sheikh Umar al-Ashkar. It's called The World of the Jinn and Demons. Very interesting book. It's in English as well. And he mentions that they can take on many forms. It seems like the preferred form, the easiest form to affect humans is just through waswasa, whisperings. But they can take on physical forms, he mentions. Different forms of people, animals, maybe even inanimate objects, possibly. Speaking through plants. Like in Ibn Taymiyyah's Essays of the Jinn, there was plants that would inform people of their benefits of the plant. And again, that's interesting if you look at ayahuasca, for example. Like, how do these natives in the forests, when there's thousands of species of plants, some even poisonous that can kill you, how do they discover the plant that can take you on this psychedelic journey and remove some of the veils of the conscious, into a different dimension? How? And if you look at, I mean, the jinn can speak through these plants, teach people of their benefits. So they can do loads of things like this, right? The form they choose may depend on the circumstance. What are they trying to achieve in that specific case?
Interdimensional beings.
That's one way you could refer to them in modern language. Interdimensional beings, spiritual beings, some would say, beings from a different plane. So there's many ways you could refer to them.
Do the good jinn ever try interacting with us?
I don't know for certain. I would assume, based on what we know, that they would stay to themselves, right? Okay. There would be no need for them to engage with us or interact with us. But I can't be for sure. But the evil jinn definitely do. And they can claim that they are good, right? So again, it muddies the waters. Like, what do you trust then, How do you know if this jinn is actually good or actually evil, because of the deceptive nature?
Okay. The average Muslim person my age, I'm 31 now.
Yeah. Although they assume you're like 24.
In this age range.
Yeah.
Do they know these things? Everything we're speaking about?
No. Most don't.
So there is some level of knowledge extraction which is valuable for the average Muslim that's coming out of this conversation as well.
100%. Yeah, I think generally for people as well, man.
Yeah.
Because one thing, even if you're not from a Muslim background, you will hear this conversation and be like, you know what? I know of these beings, maybe from a different culture. Like, for example, in Native American culture, they're called skinwalkers, right? The Irish call them the good people or fairies, right? Same thing. When you study what these beings are, how they shapeshift and appear and disappear and the powers they have, we're talking about the same being, right? Because again, Islamically, like I mentioned earlier, if you look at the history of religion, anthropologically, Islam ties it all together. It's the same God, it's the same creator. He sent messengers throughout history to different people in different nations, talking about the same fundamental truths. And so it's not surprising that you find the mention of these beings in other cultures and other traditions. Well, yeah, sure, they refer to them as different names, but it's the same being, essentially, whatever you call it.
You're my fourth occult podcast of this trip. And that's what I wished for. I wished for multiple. But I've come to realize that Britain is a fairly haunted place.
Oh yeah, it has a very dark history, man. Very dark history.
Right.
I hope this podcast is no more than just the occult, but there's definitely a part of what we've discussed about it. Because the way I see the occult is generally, overall, it's a very dark thing, right? It's a very dark thing, and people should try not to mess. Because look, we could be spending our time in such a more profound way by trying to connect with the positive side, our spiritual selves, developing ourselves spiritually, growing closer to God, etc., instead of losing ourselves in the dark side, if you like. But UK, yeah, it's definitely it has a dark history. There were loads of witches and witchcraft, and the more ancient religions of the UK had a lot of dark practices and stuff like this. Yeah, definitely.
You feel it while living here?
It depends where you are. Like I've had certain experiences which I can talk about. Like, because there's a time we were doing a lot of travel because of work. And we would end up staying, especially when you go out into the countryside, not so much in the cities. And we'd end up staying in some, old bed and breakfast or, in some very old building. And it wouldn't always be that comfortable, man. You would notice things were off. You sleep that night and you'll see things in your dream. Yep. And you'll just get this vibe, this feeling sometimes, But yeah, man, this stuff is very dark as well sometimes.
We will move on to the UFO section. That's the main aspect of this podcast, but we had to set context until this point. So this whole UFO meets the world of jinns. That's what fascinated me about your profile immensely. I didn't know that this is the depth of your knowledge when it comes to the Quran and jinns in general, bro. It was that topic first and foremost. I'm very curious to know where that exploration began.
Okay, so maybe a couple of years back, I was always knew about the topic of the jinn. I was never really that interested in it or the occult. And again, I knew about it, did some research on it years back, never really got into it. Wasn't an interest. But when I saw, the interest that the topic of UFOs was getting, especially in the West, in America, over the past couple of years, especially of the 2017 New York Times article that was published. New York Times is one of the most reputable news outlets in America. So they did a whole piece on the UFO topic and the whistleblowers and stuff like this. Lou Elizondo came out. I started paying attention to that topic.
Could you give us some context on this?
Yeah, so 2017, I mean, the UFO topic has gone hot and cold over the decades. 2017, the New York Times, again, published this article and it started this whole upward trend towards, or interest towards UFOs again. And I started looking into it because, serious people were talking about it now. No longer, it wasn't the case of guys with tinfoil hats in the middle of the Nevada desert, Roswell, so whereas looked down upon. So much so that, they, to show the seriousness in the topic, they even changed the term UFO. They call it UAPs now, unidentified aerial phenomenon. So they changed this term as well so the subject is taken more seriously. And then there was congressional hearings. There was whistleblowers that came out. Whistleblowers meaning people from the government that came out and said, yes, this is real. UFOs are real. We don't know what they are, but they're in the skies. They're running circles around our most prized technology. And they're a problem. From a national security standpoint, they're a big problem. And if it is, adversary technology, China, Russia, whatever the case is, that's still a problem, right? Because they've outdone us in leaps and bounds. So they showed, there was the governmental angle, which brought seriousness to the topic. That got me into it. And I started to notice patterns in the appearance or display of this UFO phenomenon and of the jinn. So I started doing some study and research into it, and I realized that, well, one, it's not a new thing that the American government's talking about. This stuff's been studied for decades. I think around the 50s, the Christians were speaking about the topic of UFOs, and they interpreted it as demons, basically. Now, the concepts in Christianity, the concept of demons in Christianity or fallen angels is slightly different than in Islam. So the concept in Christianity is that these are angels that have basically turned dark, right, and become evil. Whereas in Islam, there's no angels don't have free will, so they never disobey God. Therefore, they can never become evil in the first place. But there are the jinn. And I think some of the misunderstanding comes from the fact that Iblis, or like we said in the beginning, Shaitan, was worshipping God amongst the jinn. He was in the ranks of the angels. So therefore, it can become confusing very quickly for people. So anyway, they were interpreting them as demons or fallen angels. So that was very interesting. There was Christians speaking about this since the 50s. Some of the main researchers in the field of ufology, like Jacques Vallée, for example, the most eminent guy. He's like the godfather of the topic, the whole topic. He's a computer scientist, one of the guys that first worked on the internet when it was coming out. Very brilliant, clever guy. He wrote several books on the topic. And his conclusion, and he's an academic, his conclusion was that this phenomenon, as they refer to it, is not extraterrestrial, meaning it's not aliens from another planet. And he's written papers on this as to why he doesn't believe this is the case. One example he gives is, well, if intelligent life from somewhere else in the universe is traveling light years and has the technology to do so, is going to somehow crash on the Earth. I mean, they're not going to put any fail-safes in place for that. It doesn't make sense. And he had many other arguments for this. But anyhow, his conclusion was this is something else. And he also said that this phenomenon has been witnessed throughout history. And many cultures he referred to and religions that talk about this phenomenon and calls it different things by different names. And he talks about Irish law a lot as well. So I found that very interesting that this serious researcher, an academic, is coming to this conclusion. And then I started looking at some of the other academics. They were talking about this stuff. D.W. Pasulka, a religious studies professor in America, she talks about the UFO phenomenon and how, yes, in the media, you see one angle of it, these things flying in the air and people being abducted and so on. But there's a very dark side to it, that the people that have these experiences with UFOs, that when they go after the experience, they have many other experiences, or people that study this topic, their families are affected, right? There's this, they refer to as the hitchhiker effect, right? They've got a term for it, which basically means when someone has an experience with a UFO or a UFO experience, something follows these people, becomes attached to these people and affects their lives, their families, their kids, the neighbors even, right? It's like a virus.
Even if they're just studying it.
Even if they're just studying it. Like there's been some government officials, Jim Simivan, ex-CIA agent. He's on YouTube. You can see his stuff. He was studying this topic and he and his family had experiences. Lou Elizondo, the most famous whistleblower that's come out now, He was in the recent congressional hearing. He wrote a book recently called Imminent. He said that, when he got involved in the study, and he was heading the secret project in the government to study UFOs. He said when he got involved in the study of it, he started to see lights, green orbs flying through his home and lights in the sky and stuff like this. So, there's this phenomenon, the hitchhiker effect, as they call it. And again, there's a historical precedence to this. So I started to see this and hold on a second. There's something very interesting going on here. My studies in the jinn and different religions and how they understand these beings that are between not God, but not human, but somewhere in between, and the UFO phenomenon, there seems to be a link here. So I dove into it a bit more, and I came across, so many similarities and parallels. And my conclusion after doing the study was, well, what people are witnessing or calling UFOs or alien beings, and now they call them NHI, non-human intelligence, right, is actually the same phenomenon, just appearing or manifesting in a different way, right? Manifesting in a way that's appeasing to and makes sense to a techno-secular mind. There was an article published in ResearchGate a few months ago where these academics, said that it doesn't have to be ET, it could be other things as well. It could be, they had a category called magical entities or something like that. And within there, they spoke about jinn and other beings, from other cultures. So I found the similarities was just amazing, man. And that's what led me to the conclusion that it's actually what we're seeing is just jinn manifestations, what's going on.
Why?
Because there's a few parallels I could share with you. So first is the appearance, right? So when you talk about appearance or manifestation, what are people seeing when it comes to the UFO phenomenon? They're seeing lights, orbs in the sky. They are seeing cryptids sometimes, weird-looking creatures that appear and disappear. They're seeing these typical grey aliens, as they call them, very popular in pop culture, greys, big heads, black eyes. They are having experiences with beings that are telling them certain things, which are not always true, giving them a certain purpose. They're being abducted by these beings. So let's look at the appearance: lights, orbs, creatures, alien grey type beings. The jinn manifestations, if we see lights, right? Orbs, right? Appearing, taking on the shape and form of different creatures and animals. The Aleister Crowley, the being that he contacted, Lam, which we mentioned earlier, if you look at the picture of that being and you look at the typical grey, it's almost identical. Big head, large eyes, small features, small being, etc. So the appearance was very similar, right? Then the abduction phenomenon, right? So we know that abduction phenomenon is massive in the UFO, culture. People have been abducted. They report the abductions. There was a Harvard professor. He was the head of psychiatry in Harvard. And he wrote a book called Abductions. It was an academic piece. And what he concluded from all of his research and interviewing hundreds of thousands of people that had abduction experiences, that this is a real phenomenon. This is not mass hysteria. People are actually experiencing something, right? Now, we find the abduction phenomenon within the jinn as well, right? So, for example, at the time of Umar, one of the companions of the Prophet, when he became caliph, during his time, there was a man who just disappears, right? And his wife comes and says, my husband's disappeared after a while and she wants to move on with her life, etc. Long story short, after many years, he appears again, right? And he asks about his family. And Umar says to him that, well, where did you go? You disappeared. Didn't tell anyone, just vanished. He says, the jinn took me away. They abducted me. And they kept me as a prisoner. And then after many years, another group of jinn, good jinn, came and they fought them. They overcame them. And then they gave me, because they couldn't keep me, they said, look, would you want to return to your family or stay with us? It's your choice. And he wanted to return. So they returned him back. And he accepted this as an excuse. So this shows that the abduction phenomenon was something common and experienced at the time.
In the last section, you mentioned something about historical references of jinns. What was mentioned historically?
Also, so there's actually a very good book, The World of the Jinn, The Arabs and the World of the Jinn. It's an academic book. I can give you the reference of it. And the author does a historical sweep of Arab folklore and literature and all of this stuff, because there's a lot of it there. And, the author gathers these reports of all these different Arab tribes and communities that have had experiences with the jinn and collates them and brings them together. So there's a lot of information there about interactions between men and jinn from an Arab context, basically. There's another book called The World of the Fire Spirits. I think it's called that, or I'm paraphrasing the title. And again, the author does something similar, but also brings in other cultures and traditions Africa and Zanzibar, etc., all different parts of the world, and again collates those stories of these experiences, which are very interesting.
A friend of mine who's an explorer, he's like dedicated his whole life to cycling in the interiors of the world.
Wow.
So he's been on the show. His name is Raj Fanden. The Cycle Baba is his YouTube name.
Wow. Okay.
He told me once about this group of people. It's a nomadic tribe in the interiors of Saudi Arabia who are a little warlike. They're a little like rough.
Yeah.
Have you heard of this?
Yeah. Not of that tribe, but some Arab Bedouin tribes are known to be rough in their character.
Yeah. I would assume that if anyone has had any kind of interactions, it's these interiors of the desert kind of people. Because in the desert, there's no clouds.
Yeah.
And you're able to see really far. Anyone's seen it, it's them. I would assume that all the desert-oriented cultures of the world have had more interactions with these things.
Yeah, not only desert, I would say desolate places, which are not occupied normally by human beings. So you wouldn't find most people having experiences with these beings in cities or populated areas. According to Islamic narrations, that these beings, once they had started spreading corruption and bloodshed, that God sent the angels, including Iblis, who was amongst the angels, to basically, there was a war that took place on earth, and they pushed these beings to desolate areas, caves and mountains and dirty places which weren't inhabited. Now, whether it was in this dimension or another dimension, again, that could be speculated upon. But you would find, even through folklore and the religious texts, that you normally find these beings to inhabit desolate areas and places where people don't normally live. So yes, deserts would definitely be a place.
I've done enough podcasts by this point to know who's sitting in front of me. You're a very pure-hearted person.
I hope I am, man. I hope that's the case, man.
You're very connected.
I know my flaws, yeah.
But you're very connected. That's how I'd describe you.
Okay.
You're genuinely connected to the source.
I would like to believe so, yes.
And I can see how it's taken effort and practice on your end to get to this point. Not practice, discipline is the word I'd use. Fair to say?
Yeah. When I first got involved in social media, I came into it very pure. I wanted to do this for the right reasons. I had found guidance. I wanted to share these things with people. Yeah? Not enforce, but just share with people. Because they were human just like me. They deserved to know things just as much as I did. But when I got involved in social media and online and started getting popular and famous, we used to go to Hyde Park Speaker's Corner and became very popular at one point, right? Social media was just taking off back then. I'm talking 12, 13 years ago. It started to affect me spiritually, right? I was doing things for the views and the numbers, not necessarily doing things which were true. And I, again, commend you for something you mentioned earlier as well, that you talk about things that you want to talk about, regardless of how it negatively impacts your social media. And that's powerful, man, honestly. Hats off, man. That is very powerful. There's something for people to learn that get involved in social media. I have a lot of work to do on myself, I've made many mistakes. I fall short all the time, right? I'm human at the end of the day, But what's beautiful, again, is that God doesn't look for perfection. He's looking for persistence, a persistent effort. Yeah. Are you going to make the effort to fix yourself? We're humans. We're going to make mistakes. God mentions, there's a very powerful narration in Islam where God mentions, if you stopped sinning, God will remove you and replace you with another creation, because it distinguishes us from the pure high being. We are not perfect. God is perfect. We will make mistakes. Our job is, when we've made a mistake, recognize our mistake, learn from it, seek forgiveness from God, and become a better person. So we're all in work in progress, man. So am I. I'm not that pure or that perfect. I make loads of mistakes, but I try to keep, working on myself.
One last question, and feel free to answer it, feel free to not.
Okay.
It's the concept of time. And time is something that I'm trying to get to the bottom of in terms of philosophy. What does the Quran say about time?
In Islam, we know God knows everything. Past, present, future, He knows everything, right? He has determined all of this. But we have to also remember that it's coming from the being that's not bound by serial time, right? So it's all the same. For us, yes, we're not in the future yet. We're not in tomorrow yet. Tomorrow will be tomorrow. So from our vantage point, we can't see that. So it's something that, to fully comprehend is beyond us. But I think in not understanding is power, because it makes you realize and humbles you as a human being that there are limitations. As intelligent as God has made you, there's some things you'll understand, some things you won't. And time is a fascinating thing, man. You know, it passes by. Sometimes it feels like he's going very fast. Like I felt like this was 20 minutes, the first part. And sometimes it just drags and it's very slow, you know, but it's very hard to grasp what is it, you know, essentially.
I'm having a ball. This is a great podcast.
Likewise, man. It's fun. I've really enjoyed just this session with you. I really appreciate for you letting me, you know, express my thoughts and discussing those thoughts with me. And your style of going back and forth was very powerful as well. Because, you know, it wasn't just sit back, ask the question, doing your job. You know, you were actually engaging, which is very powerful. And I think stuff like this is very powerful for the youth, especially out there, regardless of what background you come from, to learn about, you know, other traditions and other ways of life, and to really try to understand them beyond the politics and the nonsense that's out there, pretty much.
Yeah. I think it's also why old media is dying.
Mm-hmm.
Like the news wants to create divisions.
Yes.
And I personally believe that new media definitely can create divisions, but instead we should try creating multiplications.
Yeah.
Because through cross-cultural knowledge, that's where your knowledge gains width and depth, rather than just gaining depth out of like one piece of information.
Yeah.
So my intention with this whole tour of my show was to gain cross-cultural knowledge. And I say it again. I said it to you in the breaks. I said it to you before the show. I prayed for you to visit the realms of this show. So thank you, Imran.
No, thank you for having me on, man. And like I said, you know, may God guide you, may God guide me, may God guide all of us. We're all on a journey, right? And may God facilitate that journey for all of us. You know, as long as we can facilitate some learning for people, that's the best we can do.
Here's to many more conversations over the years.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This was just the beginning. Thank you, man.
Thanks a lot, man.
That was the episode for today, ladies and gentlemen. I'd love to know what you guys thought of today's episode. I'd love to know in the comment section about which sub-chapters were your favorite parts. Please tell us about what you'd like us to discuss the next time around. Quranic studies is a chapter of the human reality that I wish to uncover over the course of the next year. The Ranveer Show is a global podcast at this point, and one of my missions when it comes to being a global podcast is to learn about all of the world's major religions in detail. So I'd love to know what you thought of today's episode, and I'd love for you to send in guest recommendations as well. Thank you for listening in. This was a very special episode, which was about the darkness, but of course, at the end, we always move towards the light.